At the end of a long journey, and the dawn of a new one, it is time to say goodbye. Thorfinn lifts a sack and hands it to Polmuk, his loyal friend. To Polmuk's surprise, he has been offered a bag of wheat and a hoe. It is time he learns to grow this crop himself. Thorfinn laments. He wishes he could have taken the time to teach Polmuk properly, but wheat is a strong and durable crop, able to flourish even through difficult conditions. Polmuk can do it. While Thorfinn turns to ask Bug-Eyes where Niska is, Polmuk looks down at the hoe and thinks on the meaning of this gesture. Welalin nitap, he says. Thank you, friend. Thorfinn smiles, happy to hear his friend reach to him through Norse language, a sincere gesture in return. Welalin Polmuk numatis nitap. Thank you, Polmuk. Farewell, friend. Thorfinn turns to Misekwe and extends his hand. Till we meet again. Misekwe looks down at the hand for a moment. The hand of this man, his enemy by his own choice. No matter the mistakes already made, this man can just as easily be a friend by choice too. He extends his hand to meet Thorfinn's. Nomlotes Nod Sakma. Farewell, Nord Chief. Not necessarily a friend, not just yet, but he will extend his hand either way. The ships depart. Arne's village and the wall that stains it, now left behind. Thorfinn looks back and takes notice of something. One thing he does not wish to leave unsaid. On the shoreline, watching them depart, is Kakake, self-proclaimed king of the island, still holding the sword that he believes solidifies his long rule to come. Thorfinn calls out to him. A word of warning! Throw away that sword. If you wish for the Elnu to continue living peacefully on this island for long, throw that sword into the sea. You will succumb to the call of violence. Hearing these words, a final warning delivered in his own best interest, Kakake unsheaths the sword and raises it above his head, laughing as it continues to glisten in the sunlight of a new day. He will not be throwing away the sword, will he? Before long, Vinland begins to shrink over the horizon. Too late to turn back now, isn't it? Bug-Eyes grabs a rope and begins pulling in a small boat carrying supplies. He disembarks on his own, but we quickly find he is not alone at all. Niskwaji has stowed away. She and Bug-Eyes have decided that they will continue to live together. This small boat will be their wedding present. Thorfinn begins to ask him to wait. Surely he doesn't have to go. But Bug-Eyes continues. If I stayed on the island, I'd be killed by Kakauke and his guys. But if I brought Niska to Greenland, she'd be forced to live like a Nord. Thorfinn tries to encourage him, that Niska is smart and she can overcome the cultural difference. But Bug-Eyes stops him. That is not the problem. The problem is only that the violence is too recent. The cultural difference has no bearing on them. Bug-Eyes asks if they'll see them off with a smile, but they look at them, worried for their future and sad to see them go. But where once he would ask that nobody rely on him, nobody depend on him for anything, he now says, "Call me if you ever need an interpreter. I'll come running." He may be departing, but still their experiences together have left Bug-Eyes sincerely happy, changed forever. Thorfinn smiles and congratulates them. He asks Niska to take care of Bug-Eyes, and, as she has said many times before, she unfittingly replies with, surprisingly sophisticated. After a moment, Thorfinn can't help but share one more laugh with his friend. I always thought she meant that as a kind of, I can do it, you know? Bug-Eyes doesn't want to correct it. A funny and charming display of the language barrier being surpassed. It doesn't need to be perfect. The heart is there. Cordelia and Hild call out, congratulating them and wishing them well. Both women who had accepted violence are now able to leave Vinland with a hopeful look forward, a gift of new peace they very nearly could have lost. The rest of the Norse villagers call out as well. They may have found themselves in a war with the Ilnu, but even they can still hold on to the fact that Niska is, with no doubts, a forever friend. Bug-Eyes raises their sail and asks Niska where they shall go. When she first met the Norse, she felt awe as she looked to their ships. Wonder for this culture she does not yet understand. Now, she can take one anywhere. She can't return home, and she can't go to the world her Norse friends came from. So, where else can she go but somewhere not here? The Saga of the Greenlanders, a 13th century manuscript, describes 6 voyages of Europeans to the land in North America they called Vinland. Thorfinn Karlsefni's settlement project was the 5th of these, and seems to have been the largest one. Why did these adventurers travel to the ends of the earth? For the Icelandic trader Thorfinn Karlsefni, it would have been more natural to turn to continental Europe in search of wealth. He could have also made a name for himself by going Viking, but he chose to go pioneering in the New World. Why? To what end? Perhaps it was for love, as all things are. Polmuk, still wearing his Norse tunic, plunges his hoe into the soil, the first of the Kipui to till the earth. In the fall, he scatters the seeds and watches over them earnestly. Wheat is a strong crop, but it is a labor of love. In order to see the growth you hope for, you must give it time, patience, and care. Through all conditions it may face along the way. Scattered in the distant fall, the wheat is now sprouting, to be harvested in an early summer yet to come. What sprouted were prayers for the future. We must not let them die out. And that is the end of Vinland Saga. I can't believe I am saying those words, but here we are. I have a lot to say, so let's talk analysis. And let's get the negatives out of the way right now. One thing that does not sit quite well with me. I figured this was clearly where Bug-Eyes and Niska were heading, so I am not surprised. Still, knowing that she is still a child and still illustrated as such does not sit very well for me. At this time, she is probably around 17, and Bug-Eyes is the same age as Thorfinn, around 27, 28. So, I think it is an unfortunate combination of different cultural values, both of the past and still of other countries today. I think it is a shame that this baggage is attached, and I understand the negative reactions to it, because I felt the same way, but I don't want to let this hold me back from appreciating what this final chapter achieves. So I won't dwell on it, because that specific aspect aside, I feel this was the perfect way to bookend Vinland Saga. So let's properly start with saying goodbye. Since the start of Thousand Year Voyage, Polmuk has been one of the most curious and optimistic members of the Kipui tribe when it came to coexistence with the Norse. As tensions rose, as blood was first shed, as his people were left hurting, we feared for the worst, that their new friends will have no choice but to be turned against them. For much of my reviews, I talked about how the Kipui tribe being turned against the Norse was an inevitable promise of the story, that it had to happen. Even after the other tribes were introduced and war began, I was still anticipating this inevitable moment where friends would fight friends. And when disease struck the Kipui tribe and Polmuk felt guilt for bringing that curse onto his people, I thought surely that would lead to the breaking point. But no. Polmuk has remained a loyal friend to the very end, and it was the Norse and Olnu as one people who ultimately came together to restore peace. Polmuk refused to let warnings of some vision of a future yet to come interfere with what he saw right in front of him, a powerful companionship built with their Norse neighbors, an opportunity to exchange ideas with each other and grow. Those skeptical of the Olnu at the beginning of the arc warned that if they built a dependence on each other through trade, eventually the Olnu may come to learn how to produce the products they want for themselves, and thus their need for peace with the Norse would vanish. So, this gesture from Thorfinn is more than just giving him wheat. It is a symbol of trust for their lasting friendship, that even as they continue on independent of one another, what they have created between their people, between each other, will still endure. Now for Monsieur Pourquoi. This moment is quite interesting to me. I think some tension still lingers from him, but it's hard to say where it's from. Monsieur Pourquoi likely does not suddenly believe his vision was not real. He's not just going to toss aside his entire belief system just because of this. Still, he has come to see what is right in front of him. That even if war and disease and loss are to come for his people at a terrifying scale, this here and now was not a conflict that was necessary, and this is not a man who must be his enemy. And so, he still has a choice, and he chooses to meet the hand reached out to him, to try and begin seeing this Nod Sakamal as a friend. And Kakake. His final scene, to me, is one final admittance from the story that there are still problems that Thorfinn, one man and his words, cannot so easily solve. Just as you will find people who hate violence and share that sentiment with you, you will also find people who at best don't see it as inherently wrong, and at worst, relish in it. To these people, who may very well be reading this chapter, one last warning: throw the sword away. I know many people hoped Thorfinn would take the sword and break it himself, but the time for that has passed. Thorfinn does not want to make demands or use physical means to prove an ideological point. To do so would simply be to restart conflict. All he can do is call to him, not as an enemy, just as a fellow man, and leave a sincere warning in hopes that he, after all he has seen here, might listen. Will he listen to this warning? His final panels do not bode well for it, but let's hope regardless. Now, let's go back to Eyes and Niska, because despite what I said earlier, I do think there is a lot of good here. And I want to start that with how this is a very good character conclusion for Bug Eyes. As long as he has been in this story, Bug Eyes has been a cynical and cowardly person, never looking forward optimistically, never taking risks, and never showing the people around him his sincere feelings. At the start of the arc, this approach to life naturally attracted people of equal insincerity to him. He shallowly clung to wealth as a means of securing something like love, because there was no way a man who closed his heart to others and shrouded himself in cynicism could find it any other way. When all that crumbled away, he chose to go to Vinland, not for an ideological reason, but because it was simply a chance for something better than what he had. All of these feelings come from an incredibly low self-worth. A former slave who was only purchased because he had the name of another. His entire life, as long as we have known him, he has been a person without purpose, so he stopped looking for it. Until Vinland, where despite his urging that he be counted on for nothing but the sea, Bug Eyes found himself the interpreter between two peoples. Arguably the most important and relied upon person in the Norse settlement. And in that role, he met Niska, and for the first time found himself forming a sincere bond with someone, not because of any sort of wealth, and not born from shallow desires, a real connection that got him to show his heart more often. Then, war came, communication faltered, and his sense of self-worth reverted as he was of no use to anyone on the battlefield. Bug Eyes, like the rest of the Vinland pioneers, was not somebody who was compatible with the world they ran from. And in Vinland's peace, he finally did find self-worth. At the start of the arc, Bug Eyes didn't want to go to Vinland, and left his friends unceremoniously, unwilling to show his heart to them. Now, as he departs from his friends once more, he confidently and sincerely tells them, "Call me if you ever need an interpreter. I'll come running." Now for Niska. Firstly, I do really love the acknowledgement of the surprisingly sophisticated line here. Having the characters actually talk about it is the most perfect and heartfelt way to end that gag. More importantly though, she is used to address the idea that these two peoples are incompatible due to cultural differences. When people talk about the historical expeditions of Greenlanders to North America, they often simplify the failure of these expeditions to cultural differences, as if that on its own is enough. Through Niska, Yukimura tries to push back on that assumption. While cultural differences did play a role in the escalation of conflict in Vinland, its existence was a matter of fact that all had the ability to reconcile with as they saw fit. For Msekpukwe, cultural difference was a point of tension, a sign of inability to coexist, something to intensely fear. But for Niska, cultural difference was something to engage with, to observe in awe, and study curiously. Bridging those differences is a wonder, and stumbling as you sincerely try is charming. Both are love all the same. Even still, while there are cultural differences, there are some things that are just universally human. For Niska here, it is the desire for somewhere not here, for better circumstances, for a happy and full life. At the very beginning of the story, we watched this desire rise in the people of the old world we knew. Now, in Vinland, the place we dreamed of running to for so long to satisfy that desire for somewhere not here, a native girl sets out on a ship, holding on to that same desire. Chapter 2 of Vinland Saga is titled Somewhere Not Here, and since then, these words have been echoed many more times. Now, the final chapter carries that same name, with a small difference. The title of Chapter 2 is written in hiragana, the most broadly used Japanese script. But here, for the final chapter, that same title is written in katakana, the Japanese script usually used for foreign words and ideas. Perhaps they may be written differently, or communicated in a way less familiar. But across all cultures, the human condition gives rise to the same hopes and desires. Now, what makes this final piece of narration so impactful to me, and so fitting as the last words of this story, is that it answers a question I have always wondered about. Why did Makoto Yukimura choose to write about Thorfinn Karlsefni? The Saga of the Greenlanders gives this account of an Icelandic trader attempting to settle North America, but ultimately being forced to retreat due to violence. Why did he look at this effort that ultimately comes to end in failure, and still feel that he wanted to tell that story either way? What these pages tell me is that what inspired him to take on that task was itself another question. Why did Thorfinn Karlsefni choose to go on this journey? In this violent time, what emotions and experiences could have led him there? To what end? And here, I feel Yukimura is saying, what could it have been to send these people away from the world they knew into the unknown, seeking something else, with so much risk and uncertainty surrounding them, if not love? Something we would go to the ends of the earth for. And finally, the final pages of the chapter. If chapter 219 was about reflection on the experiment, looking back at what went wrong to lead to this result, and thinking about what could have been done better, this final chapter acts as its ideological pair. When you look back at something you tried, it is certainly good to think of the things that you could have done better. But you can also look at the good things, at what you found and achieved. This whole arc, we knew what history said would come of this attempt to settle Vinland. Violence would break out, and the Norse would retreat. So, if that was where it was going to go, surely that means their experiment would end in failure, right? In all my videos to the very end, I felt no hesitation labeling it as such, an inevitable failure. But as I see Polemuk take up the hoe that was gifted to him, till the earth, plant his seeds, gently admire the sprouts, I see things a bit differently. What this is a tangible, physical result of Thorfinn's methods, an enduring proof of what he achieved in Vinland by approaching its people in earnest, with a hand extended in friendship. Yes, violence did come after all, and a retreat was the only choice they could find that would stop it. That is something to learn from, a series of errors to not repeat the next time. But on this field is an new man who still calls them his friends. This encounter has been carved into the earth, and through some love and care, the seeds planted from it might carry their prayers, their dreams, into the future. Looking at that, I do not see the failure I anticipated at all. Much of what I predicted for the ending leaned very heavily into the 1,000-year voyage idea, skipping far ahead in time to the modern day for some residual of this journey to pass on to us. While I do think there is a lot of potential in this idea, I'm really happy Yukimura once again came at it from an angle I did not expect. What I had pictured certainly had thematic resonance, but ultimately it would feel very impersonal to these characters we have spent so long following. The ending I pictured was an optimistic and hopeful one, just as this one is, but it almost reserved that feeling for us and not the characters, who would be left to their failure. Rather than jumping through their lives detached to show where history indicates they will end up, Yukimura chooses to let these characters have that same open-ended hope he wanted to give us. Just because their lives have a destination, an eventual end, does not mean that they do not still get to have hope for the future. That is not something Yukimura could bear to take from them. So, instead, this ending chooses to focus on cultivating and celebrating what made this experiment beautiful. The way sincerely trying could still succeed in bringing two peoples together, even if it wasn't the perfect dream we wanted. By taking this angle, Vinland Saga perfectly uses the genre of historical fiction to convey its core message. If you are familiar with this history, you spend this whole story in anticipation of these historical events you know will come. Then it centers its final arc around that premise, to remind you of this bad future and convince you to anticipate the worst of those events, both in how they must come to pass and where they will leave the characters. As the cracks begin to show and violence inevitably begins, we can't help but see that bad future we fear. Yet, as we anxiously look at all the ways things must surely go wrong, again and again, the characters make choices to reach for better. Not perfect, but better nonetheless. And finally, in the end, it comes back around to say, yes, look at the failures so we might do better, but look at what they accomplished. Isn't it a wonderful thing? You never know unless you try. Obviously, compared to expectations, this ending may not hit for everyone. But I have yet to experience an ending that truly has something to say while still being met with unanimous praise. If you were really hoping to see characters like Knut and Thorkel in this chapter, I do understand why. I do see a lot of thematic potential in seeing these characters again, but ultimately, I don't feel that was needed in order for Vinland Saga to feel complete. I think this is an ending that solidly and definitively delivered the story's final message. And while it does take a moment to show what it hopes you will take away, it ends cleanly, without going too far into telling you how you should feel about it, letting the results of the experiment speak for themselves. Could there have been more? Probably yes. Life goes on, after all. But was there anything left unsaid? Not at all, I don't think. And with that, this is also the end of my Vinland Saga chapter review series. On October 24th, 2021, I read chapter 187 of Vinland Saga, and felt like I needed to talk about this story. So, I scratched down some sloppy notes, put on my headset with its terrible built-in mic, put the chapter on my screen, and simply spoke my thoughts for anyone to hear. I posted my first review with the subtitle, Future Conflict Hints? ? From the very start, I was already anticipating the worst, wasn't I? When I later looked back on those videos, I saw so many silly mistakes, things I wished I could go back and fix, but the best I could do was take note of it and do better next time. So with each video, I got better. I got a better mic, polished up my audio mixing, got more creative in my editing, and even went as far as earnestly voicing dialogue to do these chapters justice as best as I could. While I am glad I was able to look at those mistakes and correct more and more with each new attempt, this chapter makes me feel differently. Now, I look back, 34 videos and well over 3 years later, and I see all the positive comments left for me. Even on the videos I would say are my worst, I find thank yous from around the world. Sincere words from people who would go on to become very dear friends. I did not know if I would find success with my videos. I did not know if I would even manage to find one person who wanted to hear my words. But I wouldn't have known unless I tried. So I tried again and again. That is something very special that Vinland Saga gave to me. And I am so incredibly thankful. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for watching.